Okay, so imagine this. You're walking along, maybe kicking at some dirt, and then, bam, you trip over something. But it's not just a rock, it's a tooth. And not just any tooth, but a tooth from something that lived millions and millions of years ago. Like way before dinosaurs were even a twinkle in the universe's eye, almost. Well, okay, maybe not that long ago, but seriously, like 10 million years. That's a number so big, my brain kinda just fizzles out when I try to picture it. But that's how some of the coolest stories ever told start, with a little piece of something ancient buried right under our feet. That's how I got hooked on this whole Ouranopithecus thing. I was at the Natural History Museum, looking at a display of hominid skulls. Those are like ancient human relatives, you know. And there was this one, all reconstructed and kinda eerie with these big square teeth. The label said Ouranopithecus macedoniensis. And honestly, at first I just thought the name sounded super cool, like something out of a sci-fi movie. But then I read the little blurb, and it said something about it being a possible common ancestor, or at least a close cousin, of humans and African apes. My jaw literally dropped. Like, this thing, with its funny name and its ancient Greek roots, because it was found in Greece, get it? Might be like our great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparent. It blew my mind. It's crazy to think about, right? 10 million years ago, the world was a totally different place. Like, way different. Not just no iPhones, obviously, but no cities, no roads, probably no proper shirts even. Just nature. Wild, untamed, buzzing with life we can barely imagine. And in a corner of that world, in what we now call northern Greece or Macedonia, there were these creatures, Ouranopithecus, just living their lives, munching on leaves and fruits, maybe swinging through trees, maybe walking on the ground a bit. And they had no idea, absolutely no idea, that millions of years later, some kid with a messy haircut and a love for old bones would be staring at their fossilized face in a museum, wondering all about them. The first big discovery that really put Ouranopithecus on the map wasn't a whole skeleton or even a whole skull. Nope. It was just a bunch of teeth and part of a jawbone. Imagine a paleontologist, probably sweaty from digging in the sun, carefully brushing away dirt and then seeing that glint of something hard and dark, and realizing it's not just any bone, but something special, something that could rewrite parts of our family tree. It must be like finding a secret treasure map, only the treasure is knowledge, and it's way more valuable. This happened in the late 1970s, specifically near a place called Ravin de la Pluie, which sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, doesn't it? Rainy Gully in French. Kind of poetic for uncovering something so ancient. What's really wild is how much information scientists can get from just a few teeth. My dentist always tells me how important my teeth are. And now I get it. Ouranopithecus had thick enamel on its teeth, which tells us something about what it probably ate. If you're eating tough stuff like nuts or seeds or roots with dirt on them, you need strong teeth, right? So this tells us Ouranopithecus wasn't just living on soft, juicy fruits. It was probably a bit of an omnivore, or at least a very versatile vegetarian, able to munch on harder, more abrasive foods. This is a big deal, because diet tells you a lot about an animal's environment and how it lived. If there were hard foods around, it meant the forests might have been thinning out in some places, opening up to more open woodlands or even grasslands. And then there's the jaw itself, the shape of the jaw, the size of the teeth, even the way they're worn down. All of it is like a secret code that paleontologists try to crack. They can tell if an animal chewed from side to side or up and down, how much force it put into its bites, and even sometimes if it had a powerful chewing muscle. It's like being a detective, but instead of fingerprints, you're looking at chew marks on ancient teeth. From what they've pieced together, Ouranopithecus was a pretty big primate, maybe like a modern-day gorilla in size or even bigger, but probably not quite as heavy. And it might have spent a lot of time on the ground, even though it could still climb trees. That's another massive clue because spending time on the ground can be a step towards walking on two legs, like us. Think about it. 10 million years ago, Europe wasn't just forests everywhere. Climate changes were happening. Big ones. The Earth was slowly cooling down, and in some places the thick tropical forests that had covered huge parts of the continent were starting to shrink. They weren't disappearing overnight, but they were giving way to more open woodlands, patches of savanna, and even drier areas. This is super important for Ouranopithecus because if the trees you rely on for food and safety are getting sparser, you have to adapt. You have to be able to find food on the ground, and you have to be able to move safely between shrinking patches of trees. That pressure, that need to adapt, is often what pushes evolution forward. So, Ouranopithecus wasn't just some random ape hanging out. It was a creature living through a pretty significant environmental shift. It had to be tough, resourceful, and probably pretty smart. And the fact that its fossils show up in Greece is interesting, because for a long time, most scientists thought that the real action, the big evolutionary changes that led to humans, all happened in Africa. And a lot of it did. But finding something, like Ouranopithecus in Europe, with features that hint at a connection to us, makes the story a lot more complicated, and honestly, a lot more exciting. It's like finding a missing page from a history book that you thought was complete. The bones themselves are usually fossilized, meaning the original organic material has been replaced by minerals over millions of years, turning bone into rock. So, when a paleontologist finds a fossil, they're not holding an ancient bone anymore, but a stone replica of it. It's super delicate, and you have to be incredibly careful. It's not like in the movies where they just yank a skull out of the ground. No, it's tiny brushes, dental picks, plaster jackets, and hours of painstaking work. It's dusty, hot, and sometimes really frustrating, but then you find something, and it all feels worth it. Imagine the team back in the lab, cleaning the fossils, carefully gluing tiny fragments together like the world's hardest jigsaw puzzle. They use microscopes to look at the wear patterns on the teeth. They compare the jaw fragments to those of other ancient apes and modern primates. They might even use fancy X-ray machines to look inside the bones without damaging them. It's a real science detective story where every tiny groove, every little bump on a bone tells them something. They're trying to reconstruct a living, breathing animal from just a few rocky clues, and then place it correctly on the massive, branching tree of life. The environment Ouranopithecus lived in probably wasn't what we think of as modern Greece, today with its sunny beaches and ancient ruins. More likely, it was a mosaic of dense forests, open woodlands, and maybe some marshy areas, especially along rivers. There would have been plenty of other animals around. Ancient elephants, rhinos, giraffes with shorter necks, huge wild pigs, and big cats that would have made a lion look like a house cat. It was a dangerous world, and Ouranopithecus, despite its size, would have been both a hunter of smaller things, if it ate any meat, and something that could be hunted by bigger predators. Survival would have been a daily challenge, finding enough food, avoiding being someone else's dinner, and raising young in a world where every rustle in the bushes could mean danger. And what about its social life? That's harder to tell from just bones, but generally large primates live in groups. It offers protection from predators, makes finding food easier, and helps in raising offspring. So it's pretty likely Ouranopithecus lived in some kind of social structure, maybe similar to baboons or chimpanzees today, with a mix of dominant males and females and lots of interaction within the group. They would have communicated with calls, gestures, maybe even simple facial expressions. It's a whole world of life that we only get glimpses of through these ancient remains. The name Ouranopithecus macedoniensis actually comes from Ouranos, the Greek word for sky or heaven, or sometimes referring to a mountain range, and pithekos, which means ape. So it's like the Macedonian ape from the sky or mountain ape. It sounds super grand, doesn't it? And it fits, because it's discovery was a big moment in understanding where we might have come from. It challenges the idea that all human evolution was solely an African story, suggesting that maybe there were important chapters playing out in other parts of the world, and that some of our very distant ancestors or close relatives might have ventured out of Africa much earlier than we thought, or that the common ancestor itself lived in Eurasia before parts of the lineage moved back to Africa. It makes the story of human origins much richer and more complex, and that's what makes it so exciting to learn about. It's like history is always being rewritten, not with new words, but with new bones. So, we've got this awesome ape, Ouranopithecus, chilling out in ancient Greece 10 million years ago. But why does that matter so much to us? Well, it's all about the puzzle of human origins. For a long, long time, scientists were pretty sure that all the really important steps in our family tree, especially the ones right after we split from chimpanzees, happened smack dab in Africa. It made sense, right? Chimps live in Africa, gorillas live in Africa, and all the earliest human fossils were popping up there too. It was like, okay, Africa's where it all went down. But then Ouranopithecus shows up, right in the middle of Europe. And it's not just any old ape fossil. This thing has features that make paleontologists scratch their heads and go, this looks familiar. We're talking about its face, especially the bones around its eyes and nose, and those super thick tooth enamel bits we talked about. These are what scientists call derived features, meaning they're more modern, more advanced, and kind of hint at being on the same evolutionary path as us hominins. Imagine you're trying to figure out your family tree and all your cousins live in one town. Then suddenly, you find out you have a distant cousin living in a completely different country, and they look an awful lot like your grandpa. That's kind of what happened with Ouranopithecus. Its existence in Europe at that time throws a wrench into the neat, Africa-only story. It suggests a couple of really mind-bending possibilities. One idea is that Ouranopithecus is actually a direct ancestor, or at least a very close relative, of the group that includes both African apes, like chimps, and gorillas, and humans. If that's true, it means that the common ancestor of us and African apes might have lived in Eurasia, that's Europe and Asia hooked together, and then some of its descendants migrated back to Africa. That's a huge flip from the usual story. It means our earliest ancestors, or at least their super close cousins, weren't just staying put in Africa all that time. They were explorers, even if they didn't know it. They were spreading out, adapting to different environments, and that's where some of the key features that eventually led to us might have started. Another possibility is that Ouranopithecus is a really close cousin that just evolved some of these similar features on its own, kind of like two different branches of a tree growing leaves that look very similar because they're adapting to similar conditions. This is called convergent evolution. But even if it's convergent evolution, it still tells us something important. That the conditions in Europe at that time were pushing primates to evolve in ways that look a lot like how hominins were evolving in Africa. It highlights how powerful environmental pressures can be in shaping what animals become. What makes Ouranopithecus so special are those dental features, the thick enamel on its molars, for example. Modern humans have pretty thick enamel, and so do gorillas and chimpanzees. But Ouranopithecus has it really thick. This is a big deal because it's a shared trait with later hominins. Plus, the overall shape and size of its molars, and even the way its canine teeth, the pointy ones, fit together, show similarities to early human ancestors. It's like finding a specific brand of shoe print at a crime scene. It doesn't tell you everything, but it narrows down the suspects a lot. Beyond the teeth, the structure of its face is also really interesting. The few facial fragments found suggest a broad, robust face, and the specific shape of the supraorbital torus, that's the fancy name for the brow ridge, and the nasal opening have also been noted as remarkably similar to some early hominins found in Africa, like Australopithecus. It's almost like Ouranopithecus had a face that was starting to look a little bit more human-like than a typical ape. This combination of dental and facial features is what makes it such a hot topic in paleoanthropology, the study of ancient humans. The debate among scientists is pretty intense. Some researchers argue strongly that Ouranopithecus is indeed the direct ancestor, or very close to the direct ancestor, of the African ape and human lineage. They point to these shared features and the timing, around 10 million years ago, which is roughly when genetic studies suggest the human and chimpanzee lineages diverged. If Ouranopithecus is that common ancestor, it would mean our ancestors had to move from Europe back to Africa at some point. This is known as the out-of-Europe hypothesis, and it's a big deal because it challenges the long-standing out-of-Africa model for the very earliest stages of hominin evolution. Other scientists are more cautious. They argue that while Ouranopithecus shares some features with hominins, those features might have evolved independently. They might say, yes, the teeth are thick enameled, but many other apes at that time had thick enamel too, it's not unique enough. Or, the facial features are interesting, but we don't have enough of the skull to be absolutely sure of its relationships. They might also point out that the fossil record in Europe for this time period isn't as complete as in Africa, making it harder to draw definitive conclusions. It's like having only a few pieces of a puzzle and trying to guess the whole picture. Both sides have good points, and that's why science is so cool. It's constantly being debated and refined as new evidence comes up. Imagine being a paleontologist at a big conference, and someone stands up and says, "My new fossil from country X changes everything we thought we knew about human evolution." The whole room would probably buzz with excitement and arguments. That's kind of what the discussion around Ouranopithecus has been like. It forces everyone to re-examine the evidence, look for new sites, and maybe even reinterpret older fossils. It makes the entire field much more vibrant and dynamic. Beyond its potential family connection to us, Ouranopithecus also tells us a lot about the paleo environment of Europe during the late Miocene epoch. That's the time period from about 11.6 to 5.3 million years ago. We know from the fossils of other animals found alongside Ouranopithecus, like those ancient elephants and rhinos, that the landscape wasn't uniform. It wasn't just dense jungle everywhere. Instead, it was a mix of things. Some gallery, forests along rivers, more open woodlands, and even some grasslands. This type of mosaic environment is really interesting because it's the kind of environment that often pushes primates to adapt in new ways. If you're living in a dense forest, you're probably mostly arboreal, meaning you live in the trees. But if the forest starts breaking up into patches and there are open areas between them, you suddenly have to spend more time on the ground. And walking on the ground can eventually lead to walking on two legs, or bipedalism, which is one of the defining characteristics of humans. Ouranopithecus's thick tooth enamel also supports this idea of a changing environment. If there were more open areas, there would likely be more tough, fibrous vegetation or hard-shelled fruits and nuts. Thick enamel is an adaptation for grinding down these harder, more abrasive foods. So, the teeth aren't just telling us about what it ate, but also about the kind of landscape it was living in. It's all connected. The excavations at Ravin de la Pluie, where the first significant Ouranopithecus fossils were found, continued for many years after that initial discovery, in the 1970s. Each season, the paleontologists would return, meticulously digging, sifting through tons of earth, and hoping to find more pieces of this ancient puzzle. It's incredibly slow and detailed work. Sometimes they might go weeks without finding anything significant, and then, bingo! A small fragment of bone, a new tooth, something that sheds more light on the species. These sites are not just about finding big, exciting fossils. They're also about collecting every tiny clue. Fossilized pollen grains tell us about ancient plants and climate, rodent teeth give clues about small mammal diversity, and even the sediment itself can tell a story about ancient rivers or lakes. All of this information helps scientists build a more complete picture of Ouranopithecus's world. It's like building a diorama, but with real ancient pieces. The discovery of Ouranopithecus really highlights how much we still don't know about human evolution. Just when you think you have a good handle on the story, a new fossil pops up and makes you reconsider everything. It's a constantly evolving field, driven by new discoveries and new ways of analyzing old evidence. And that's what makes it so fascinating to me. It's not a closed book, it's an ongoing mystery, and every new bone or tooth is a clue. Who knows what else is buried out there, waiting to be found, waiting to tell us another chapter in our incredibly long and winding family story. So, we've learned about Ouranopithecus, and how finding it in Greece really shook up the idea that all our earliest human ancestors came from Africa. It's like finding a super old photo of your family and realizing your great-great-grandparents spent some time in a totally different country than you ever expected. It makes the story way more complicated, but also way more interesting. The big question then becomes, if Ouranopithecus was in Europe, and it had these features that look a lot like early hominins, what exactly was going on? How did the ancestors of us and African apes end up where they did? This is where the story gets really intricate, like a super tangled ball of yarn that scientists are slowly, carefully untangling. One of the main ideas is something called the out-of-Eurasia hypothesis for the earliest part of our lineage. Not the more famous out of Africa that talks about modern humans spreading across the world, but the really ancient split. This idea suggests that the common ancestor of all great apes, including orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and us, might have originated in Africa, but then some of these ancient ape groups migrated out into Eurasia, diversified there, and then, later, some of those Eurasian apes or their descendants migrated back to Africa. Ouranopithecus could be one of those apes that stayed in Eurasia, or even one of the very last ancestors before the back migration to Africa. Imagine the Earth as a giant, slow-moving conveyor belt of continents. Millions of years ago, the land masses weren't quite in the same spots as they are today. There were land bridges, or at least easier ways to cross between continents. Africa and Eurasia were connected, sometimes by drier land, sometimes by more forested routes, so it wasn't impossible for animals to travel back and forth. Think of it like a really long road trip, but it takes millions of years and generations to complete. The climate during the Miocene epoch was also a huge player in this story. The Miocene was a long time, but specifically around 10 million years. When Ouranopithecus was around, the Earth was going through a significant cooling trend. Not like Ice Age cold, but a gradual shift from warmer, wetter, more tropical conditions to something a bit cooler and drier. This meant the vast, continuous forests that once covered much of Europe were starting to break up. They were replaced by more open woodlands, savannas, and even grasslands. This change in environment is crucial for understanding how primates like Ouranopithecus evolved. If you're a primate living in dense forest, your life is mostly in the trees. You swing from branch to branch, eat leaves and fruits directly from the trees, and escape predators by climbing higher. But when the forests shrink and there are big gaps between tree patches, you have to do something else. You have to spend more time on the ground to get from one patch of trees to another, or to find food that's now growing in the open. And this is where the clues from Ouranopithecus's bones become even more important. We talked about its thick tooth enamel, which suggests it ate harder, more abrasive foods, typical of animals that live in more open seasonal environments where soft fruits might not be available year-round. But there's also evidence from its postcranial skeleton. That's fancy talk for everything below the head. While we don't have a complete Ouranopithecus skeleton, isolated limb bones and vertebrae have been found. These fragments suggest that Ouranopithecus was a large-bodied ape, perhaps weighing as much as 150 pounds or more, similar to a large chimpanzee or even a gorilla. The structure of these limb bones, even just a few pieces, can give hints about how it moved. Some researchers suggest that its limb proportions might have allowed for some degree of terrestrial locomotion, meaning it spent a significant amount of time on the ground, perhaps even more than modern chimpanzees do. It wouldn't have been fully bipedal like us. walking upright all the time, but it might have been a knuckle walker like gorillas and chimps, or it might have had a more flexible mode of movement, able to climb trees effectively but also move around comfortably on all fours on the ground. This adaptation to a mosaic environment, where both climbing and ground travel were important, is a common theme in the story of early hominin evolution. Another fascinating aspect is what other animals Ouranopithecus shared its world with. The fossil sites in Greece, like Ravin de la Pluie and Ziracori, are treasure troves of ancient animal life. Alongside Ouranopithecus, paleontologists have found fossils of giant giraffes with short necks, prehistoric rhinos, three-toed horses, ancient elephants called gomphotheres, wild pigs, and a whole menagerie of predatory cats, like saber-toothed cats and bear dogs. It was a diverse and often dangerous ecosystem. Imagine Ouranopithecus trying to forage for food in an open woodland, constantly alert for the lurking shadows of these massive predators. It would need to be strong, perhaps, live in social groups for protection, and be clever about finding food and avoiding becoming someone else's meal. The presence of these large grazing animals also supports the idea of more open, savanna-like environments existing alongside forests, as these grazers would need expansive grasslands to find enough food. The exact relationship of Ouranopithecus to the human family tree is still debated, and it's a great example of how science works. It's not about finding one perfect answer and sticking to it forever. It's about proposing hypotheses, testing them with new evidence, and being willing to change your mind when the data tells you something different. Some scientists put Ouranopithecus as a direct ancestor of the human African ape lineage. Others see it as an evolutionary dead end, a branch that went off in its own direction and eventually died out, even though it shared some interesting similarities with our ancestors. Still others propose it might be related to orangutans, or perhaps an early offshoot from the great ape tree before the human-African ape split. What makes it so hard to place precisely is the concept of mosaic evolution. This means that different traits evolve at different rates. So Ouranopithecus might have evolved some hominin-like features, like thick enamel, while still retaining more ape-like features, like its overall body plan or how it moved. It's not a neat, straight line of evolution. It's a messy, branching bush, with different branches trying out different adaptations. The scientific tools used to study these fossils are also constantly improving. Beyond just looking at the shape of bones, scientists now use incredibly advanced techniques. They might use micro-CT scans to create detailed 3D models of teeth and bones without ever having to cut into the precious fossils. This lets them look at internal structures, enamel thickness, and root morphology in incredible detail. They can even use stable isotope analysis on tooth enamel to figure out what kind of plants Ouranopithecus ate and what kind of water it drank, giving direct evidence of its diet and the climate it lived in. It's like having a super X-ray machine that can see millions of years into the past. These high-tech analyses can confirm or challenge previous ideas. For instance, if isotope analysis shows that Ouranopithecus was eating a lot of grasses or plants found in open environments, that strengthens the idea that it lived in a mosaic habitat and was adapted to foraging on the ground. If it shows a diet primarily of soft fruits, it might suggest a more arboreal, forest-dwelling existence. Every piece of data, no matter how small, contributes to building the bigger picture. The story of Ouranopithecus isn't just about a single species. It's about understanding the broader picture of Miocene hominoid diversity. Hominoids is the bigger group that includes all apes, great apes, and lesser apes. During the Miocene, there was an incredible variety of apes living across Africa and Eurasia. Many of them are now extinct, but their fossils give us clues about the different evolutionary experiments that were happening. Some were small, some were huge. Some probably lived entirely in trees, others spent more time on the ground. Ouranopithecus is just one piece of this larger, bustling ape world. The fact that these apes were so widespread across Eurasia during The Miocene suggests that conditions were favorable for them. It wasn't until later, as the climate continued to cool and dry, and as other groups of mammals became more dominant, that many of these Eurasian ape lineages died out. So, Ouranopithecus is also a snapshot of a time when apes were much more widespread geographically than they are today, before their range became restricted mainly to tropical Africa and parts of Asia. And this leads us back to the idea of migration. If Ouranopithecus, or a close relative, was in Eurasia, and then later, the human African ape common ancestor was in Africa, that means a journey happened. It means that some populations of these ancient apes packed their evolutionary bags, so to speak, and made their way across continents. This kind of large-scale migration is not something one animal decides to do, of course. It happens over countless generations as populations slowly expand their range, following food and favorable conditions, adapting as they go. The story of Ouranopithecus is a testament to the power of a single fossil discovery to reshape our understanding of history. Before it was found, the narrative was simpler. With it, the narrative became richer, more complex, and full of exciting new possibilities. It reminds us that our family tree is not a straight line, but a sprawling, ancient tree with many branches.